Hello, screenwriters, and welcome to Writing for Screens. Today's episode, Behind the Script, The Burning Angels. My name is Glenn Gers, and I am the Chief Operating Everything here at Writing for Screens, a channel that I have created in order to take some of the skills, tools, and insights that I had to figure out for myself in a 25-year career writing for TV and movies. On my way out of the business, I am trying to leave behind these things I had to do for myself so that you can take them, try them out for yourself, see if they work for you. There is no system, there is no grand plan or formula, because I believe that every artist must make their own path. You have to figure out what you want to do, what you are capable of doing, what your situation is, what your style is. All of those things are yours. I can't tell you how to do it. All I can tell you is these are some of the things I think operate in this world. Try them out, see if they work for you. In order to help you with that, this is a screen grab of my main channel page, and if you look down towards the bottom, you'll see a whole bunch of colorful boxes. Those are the thumbnails for playlists, and on these first 3 playlists, as you scroll down, here's a close-up, you will find 50 10-ish minute videos. 50 10-minute videos, I call them the lesson videos. Each one is on a topic. The topic is both the title of the episode and its big, bold thumbnail, so that you can just browse and say, oh, genre, flashbacks, dialogue, character. Look, he's got 10 minutes on that topic. Let's see what he has to say. I beg you, I urge you to look at these. They are there 24/7 for free for you to see if they will help you. That is all I got. However, having finished doing that, I started doing these live streams, which are now every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time Zone. I come on and I talk about something for about an hour. I answer questions sometimes. Today, I'm not going to be answering many questions except on the topic of this, because we are doing a behind the script. That means that I am taking a script I wrote, I am giving you a copy of it, and I am saying, these are some things I think you might not know about it. These are some things I think you can learn from it. That is what we are doing today. It is a script called The Burning Angels, and there are two different versions of this script available for you to read should you want to. The link is in the description of this video. If you look down, you will find down at the bottom of the description a link. You go to that page, you can download the PDFs of both drafts of this script. The first one was the original draft in 1995, which was sold to Jodie Foster's company Egg Pictures back in those days. I then did 4 drafts of rewrites, and I'll talk about that process. And the script that is the other version, The Burning Angels, is the one that came out of that process. I am really proud of it. I think it is an amazing script, but I will also talk about what's wrong with it and tell you what happened to it. And that is what we are doing today. It'll probably be a long episode because there's 2 scripts to talk about. All right, let me do some quick hellos, then we'll get right to it. Hello, Akari and Thumper and Elroy and Steed. Hiya, all of you. Okay, let's talk. So once again, the script I'm going to be talking about, there's 2 drafts of it from a few years apart. They are available for you in PDF format if you go down to the description of this video and click the link. All right, let's talk about this script. This is, the original version was called Headshots. Here's the title page of the original. I wrote this. What happened was, well, the big picture here is these 2 drafts of the script are substantially different structurally. I cut the main character out. They are very, very different. And what I hope to show you here is something that it took me a long time to learn, which is there are many, many ways that you can tell the same story. And especially as a professional screenwriter, you are very often asked to do that. They will say, oh, I really love this thing, but let me completely destroy it and I want an entirely different version of it. Can you do that? That is the job. That is the job of a screenwriter in the American entertainment business, at least. And what I found fascinating with this, because this was the best possible version of that, this company and these people were extraordinarily supportive and respectful of the problem here. And they didn't ask me to change the script this much. I looked at it and I said, this is what it has. In order to make it work for you guys, this is what we have to do. There's actually a movie written, directed by David Mamet. It's not a great movie. It's called State and Maine. But there's this running gag in it. It's about a movie being made in a small town in Maine. And the movie's name, I believe, is The Old Mill. And the screenwriter in the story is suffering terribly because they keep saying to him, we can't get the old mill. We can't use that location. You need to change the old mill to something else. And he's like, the name of the movie, the point of the movie, the symbol of this movie is the old mill. And now you are telling me change the old mill. And in fact, he does find a way to change the old mill. And that is the story, essentially, that I'm going to tell you about Headshots and the Burning Angels. Especially interesting is the main thing is the hookiest part of this script is the first 20 or so pages. The opening sequence is wonderful. Everyone loved it. So that never changed. What did change was the ending, which is equally, the ending is super powerful as far as I'm concerned in both versions. Although honestly, the second script, the changed version of the script is better. It is substantially better. It is a much, much better script in every way. But what's interesting is I had to take the same concept and I don't want to spoil things, so I'm not going to tell you exactly what it is, but the essential action of the final scenes I wanted to preserve. However, like I said, I had taken the main character out of the movie. So now we have the same action, which that main character took in the original version. And I had to think of how can I tell that same story, that same moment, but with this whole different set of people involved in exactly the same scene. And so it's really interesting, I think, to see the two versions of the same action, because they're both there, without question, the same action, but different people are doing the things. So it's a really cool comparison to show how something works. It works both ways. I think both versions are fine. Like I said, the second version, the one where I had to destroy my script, is much better. And that's what I think is really cool. So the other thing I have to warn you is this script is full of the F word, the F-bomb. There is no way to remove them from the script. So if you are reading along, you are going to see, I will not read it out loud a lot, but the F word, it's all over this script because I felt like these people would use this language, and especially the character who uses it at the beginning. It's kind of a joke. It's a fascinating piece. There's the first sequence. The main villain character only says the F word. That's all he says for like 10 pages. Anyway, so that's the big picture of what we're going to be looking here. A couple more hellos. Hello, Pedro. Glad you're lurking. Hi, Thomas. Steed. Oh, the movie with the old mill is called State and Maine by David Mamet. It's a fun little ensemble comedy. State and Maine. Okay, so let me give you the history of this project, which started out as a script called Headshots. The way this started for me was there was a book which was first serialized in the New Yorker magazine and then published as a book. It won the Pulitzer Prize. It's called "Is There No Place on Earth for Me" by Susan Sheehan. There we go. Yeah. This book is an astonishing bit of journalism. It follows a mentally ill woman through the New York City healthcare system and life in New York as a person with severe mental illness. It's phenomenal. It's a great, great book. Very moving, very thoughtful, provoking. And what happens for me often is I will read something nonfiction, and it will come alive to me as a story. in the sense that, yes, you could adapt. Like I suppose they could make a movie out of Is There No Place on Earth for Me? That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to find the movie version of this insight into what it's like. We all see mentally ill people, especially homeless people, unhoused people on the street are often mentally ill. And we can't help but try to understand why are they behaving like that. This book is a whole detailed description of what it's like to be that person, and it was very overwhelmingly emotional for me to read this. I just thought, wow, how can I make a story out of that? Because that's my instinct, and it's like, well, I don't want to write journalism. I want to make stories out of it. I don't entirely understand why I do that, but that is my instinct. So I this was on my mind for years, how to convey that powerful image that I got in the nonfiction, the information, the vision, but in a story, in a movie, because that's cool. The first element of it that came to me, and I don't exactly remember how or why, but I thought, what if that woman in the book, what if a schizophrenic woman living in New York City witnessed a murder by a police officer? I don't understand how that came into my head. I don't remember. But I know that I just thought, what a hook. Wow. The idea of this thriller, because it would then be like, the thing about a witness to a murder, it's very Hitchcocky, an ordinary person who is drawn into sinister thriller situations. And the point of it for me especially was the murder by a cop, because therefore you're in real danger, because you can't necessarily go to the police. And second of all, as a mentally ill woman, a person with schizophrenia, she would not be believed. And to me, the key to this story was the idea that even if you are damaged, if you are an outsider, if you are difficult, if you are disturbing to people, you still could be right. You still could be good. You still could be the hero. And so that was sort of like, oh, that's a cool story. At some point in the 1980s, I was walking in New York City. You will often see, or at least back in the old days, people would put posters, like Xeroxed signs, up on lampposts to advertise things. And many of them were advertising the services of photographers for actors. They were taking headshots. Headshots are the portraits of actors that are given when you audition, in order to remind people of who you are when you're gone after the audition. So that's called a headshot. So I'm walking around the streets of New York, this story in the back of my mind of a schizophrenic woman who witnesses a murder in New York, on the streets of New York, and I see these signs saying headshots. And to me, it was like, whoa, that's a cool phrase, not in terms of actor portraits, but it seemed scary and psychological and violent and thrillery. So I said, I want to make this movie called Headshots. That's what I'm going to call this thriller about the schizophrenic woman. In order to make that make sense, I thought one of the characters should be an actor. And at some point I came up with the idea that this actor character would work in the mental hospital that the schizophrenic woman is in for part of the story. And that it works as an orderly, what they called a therapy aide at that time. And the idea was that this guy works, and the character I developed was a character named Christy, who works in the mental hospital as his day job. As instead of bartender or waiter, he works as an orderly in this hospital, partly because he grew up with a schizophrenic mother. In other words, he's used to it. He grew up caretaking, and therefore it's a thing he knows how to do. And so therefore he was working in this hospital, and the woman, the main character, Mary, in the story, reaches out to him because he was kind to her when working in the hospital. And what grew from that is a couple of things. The first is the idea that his relationship to a mentally ill woman would be very, very fraught. It would have deep emotional difficulty for him, because both wanting to take care but also feeling resentment or anger, and it would be a deep psychological vein of his character. So that was the center of the story for me. And I began to think about how it would be cool it would be if there was a love story between these two people, this mentally ill woman and this young actor, aspiring actor who works as an orderly in a mental hospital. In the thriller, there was a great but flawed thriller at the time called Jennifer 8, written by a guy named Bruce Robinson. It's a terrific script and very nicely made. It doesn't quite work, but it was part of there were a lot of thrillers at this time in the late 80s, early 90s. There's one called Blink, which was about a blind woman who witnesses a murder or is in some way. It was a genre, a subgenre, a mini genre. Anyway, so I said, that's what I'm going to do. Now, what happened was I had this other script, which had been knocking around for 10 years at the time, which was a rom-com thriller, sort of in the vein of North by Northwest. For various reasons, after 10 years of knocking around and being much beloved but never bought, it got optioned by Hollywood, which gave me enough money to quit my temp job for the first time and actually just be a full-time writer. And so I had a year in which I had an office. I rented a little office space, and I was going to go and write my next script and take advantage of this money I had from this option on this other script, which was a disaster area. I will tell that story another time, but that story was about basically, I finally sold a script after 10 years of writing scripts, having an agent, finally sold one, or optioned it, and I had no idea how to do a rewrite. I had never done a real rewrite. Certainly not a rewrite, like I said, where the Hollywood people say, hey, can you take this and do a very, very different version of it? I did not know how to do that. It completely fell apart. I could not. I wrote a draft. It was absolute garbage. I was immediately fired from my own script. So now I had this weird situation where I had a bunch of money so I could write for a year, the first time in my life. And I had entree to Hollywood because for the first time my script had been picked up by this big Hollywood company. It was in limbo. It was never going to get made. But for a minute there, I had the eye of people, like they wanted to know what my next project would be. The point about this is to show how much I did not understand the job of screenwriting, the professional reality of being a screenwriter. So the first thing I did not understand was I had sold a rom-com thriller. The first thing I said was, I want to do something very different, a very dark, psychological, twisted, disturbing indie thriller. Now, what Hollywood likes most is for you to do the same thing. If you've written a horror movie, they want to see more horror movies from you. If you've written a rom-com, do more rom-coms. I, of course, immediately followed my rom-com with this dark, indie, twisty thriller. Second of all, because it was based in this book, I became fixated on being truthful about mental illness, because one of the things about this book, this amazing book, and then with the book I read for research, this one, which I've talked about before, called Surviving Schizophrenia, which has a long, long chapter called The Inner World of Madness. Oh, sorry about that. There we go. Which describes for like 40 pages what it is like to be inside a schizophrenic's mind. In other words, what the experience of being schizophrenic is. Now, most people, certainly in the early 1990s, schizophrenic basically meant split personality, which we now call multiple, they called it multiple personalities. And that's not true. It's not remotely the same thing. But that word meant that to people. And people don't really know that much about the illness. And so it was very, very important to me to convey the facts of schizophrenia. The other thing is, for some reason, I just decided it never even occurred to me to follow the hero's journey, 3-act structure, single story. I did not structure my story that way. The way I structured it was basically here. I did a little story map, a little diagram. Basically, Mary is the schizophrenic woman. Christy is the young man who she turns to for help when she is afraid of the police. So there's a very complicated relationship going on between Mary and Christy on the left side. Christy is trying to overcome his feelings of anger at his mother for being ill, and yet his great empathy for Mary and his mother, which he feels great. And furthermore, he begins to actually fall in love with Mary. So it's a very complicated relationship. It's its own little circle there. On the other side, Frank is the policeman who shoots his girlfriend in the apartment next door to Mary. Frank is a monster in this version. And he has a sergeant. Frank is a probationary patrolman. He's just a first-year street cop in New York City. And there is an older cop who I've called Doyle, who is trying to help him when he has committed this crime, which actually is an accident. And he goes to Doyle and says, this thing happened. I'm in trouble. I need help. Can you help me cover it up? And Doyle is then in the position of trying to protect Frank. But as the story goes on, it becomes clearer and clearer that Frank is bad. Doyle may be corrupt, but he's not evil. And Frank is actually evil. So there's 4 central characters in this story. And Frank and Mary are pressing at each other. They are coming at each other. They are in conflict. And Christy and Doyle are sort of, each have their own arc within that of coming to deal with the person who is pressing on the story. That is not a conventional thriller story. It is very complicated. It is very uncertain. Let me just do a couple of quick comments because that's a good thing to do. First of all, yes, State and Maine indeed is like Sweet Liberty, and like many, there's a bunch of behind the scenes in a movie in a small town. Hi, Pennywise. Also reminded of Eyes of Laura Mars. Yes, Eyes of Laura Mars, which is a fascinating stylistic experiment and a truly god-awful movie in many ways, but really cool in other ways. It's got this really great New York vibe of that time. It's a weird movie. But yes, Eyes of Laura Mars was definitely on my mind at the time, but partly as I do not want to do that, because what Eyes of Laura Mars and Blink did, which was basically take a disability and turn it into a gimmick for a conventional thriller. And I was like, I will not do that. Which, of course, if you're trying to sell something to Hollywood, you should do that. That is what they demand. So the other things about this script that are disastrously bad is I wanted to direct it myself. In fact, I insisted on directing it myself. So therefore, I wanted to keep it relatively cheap. It's very small scale. There's some stuff that costs money, but most of it is long, talky dialogue scenes, which I loved. Still love, honestly. A good talky dialogue scene just makes my day. But when you read the headshot script, you will see this is like insanely long speeches, insanely long scenes, and the love story within it is, first of all, tremendously unexpected, and second of all, very painful. Christie is a messed up person. That is the point, is that he is finding his way through love to overcoming his messed upness, but he's awful. So these are all the reasons that this script was insanely bad for anyone trying to sell to Hollywood. Okay. Steed says, mental health is very poorly represented in film even now. This is true. It was important to me, and it was respected by Jodie Foster's company. Thank you. Thank you very much for saying, yeah, I believe that now and then there is a difficult balance between the art and entertainment of a story and the factualness you are trying to convey. It is very rare and difficult that you can preserve the truth, the reality of things within an entertainment format. I give credit to anyone who's even trying, but that was my goal, and I made it a absolute deal point with Jodie Foster's company. I said, if you can't honor that, I don't want to do the project at all. Okay, so what happened was, basically, I was living in my mind in an auteur universe where a filmmaker with a distinctive vision working within the reality of low-budget indie film gets to do what they want and everyone loves it. That's the vision that I grew up with. When I grew up in the 1960s and 70s, films like that and filmmakers like that were happening. But there was another thing happening at the same time, which was the rise of the corporate blockbuster. And eventually the blockbuster pretty much wiped the indie auteur film off the map for a while. But my goal was to be that auteur filmmaker. But I wasn't. Nobody was going to support that. First of all, I had never directed anything. Anyway, I wrote that script with my time that I had won from selling the other script and having a disaster. And by November 1995, here we go, look, November 1995, the script was done. I showed it to my agent. She loved it, but recognized that it was a difficult sell. And she found an independent producer named Karen Dare. Karen Dare was, at the time, she had been working for various indie companies, and now she was going out on her own as an indie producer. She was working with Noah Baumbach on his first film, Kicking and Screaming. And she took the script and she brought it to Meg LeFauve. Meg LeFauve is now a very famous screenwriter and a marvelous screenwriter and a wonderful person. But at the time she was the person running the creative development of Jodie Foster's company, Egg Pictures. What Jodie Foster had done was set up a company financed by a big movie corporation. Many stars and directors set up these companies in order to produce their own films and sometimes produce for other filmmakers. And Jodie's interest was indie films. She was very, very indie filmmaker minded. So she was the right person to bring it to for two reasons. One, she was perfect for the lead role, Mary. And two, her company supported this kind of artsy filmmaking. So they read it and they said, it needs work, but wow, this is a powerful script. But here's the deal. There is no way on earth you can direct it. Jodie Foster has worked with many great directors, and she knows the importance of a good director, and she is not going to put herself in the position of being directed by someone who has never directed anything. So they said, the deal is we will try and make your movie, but not with you directing. And I said, that's fair. That one's reasonable. I will give up on the directing part if I know that you will honor the things I am trying to accomplish with the script in terms of mental illness, especially in terms of that. They were remarkably respectful, probably too respectful. And so what happened was we spent a lot of time going through this script, and if you do read it, you'll see. I'm gonna spend a little time on this script now because then we're going to move past it. So the first page after the title is a quote from a Ricky Lee Jones song, "We Belong Together," from the album Pirates. By the way, the album Pirates by Ricky Lee Jones is freaking amazing. And this song, "We Belong Together," is one of the most haunting and beautiful songs ever made. But it's also incredible because it just seemed to speak to these characters. So I was like, I'm making that my first page. The truth is, these quotes at the beginning of scripts, Hollywood doesn't love it. Okay, so the first page of this, just a couple of quick comments. Let's see. Good, intelligent conversation in real life is hard to find, but for those of us who are tired of high action, it's delicious, like My Dinner with Andre. Yes, absolutely. There are great scripts with great long dialogue scenes. Absolutely. This script pushes that too far. I don't blame Jodie, honestly. Either did I. That was absolutely fine. And Michael points out, "Wait Until Dark" was one of the classics about a blind woman whose life is in danger. Exactly right. Another part of the subgenre. Okay, so here's the first page of this script. And what it is let's say 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs roughly describing the stuff that I told you I had read in this book about the inner experience of mental illness. So this starts, and if you notice, I'm kind of playing with the reader here because my slug line, as you can see, is not interior, exterior placed. It just says inside a broken mind. In other words, inside a schizophrenic's point of view. And this is very fancy poetic writing. There's only half a page. It's not a lot. But it's great because when you read this, you're like, whoa, what am I getting into here? It's describing the perceptions of a woman having a severe schizophrenic episode who is in a department store at Christmas time. And she is seeing angels catch on fire. She is seeing inside a department store, but also she's hearing, because auditory hallucinations are a large part of schizophrenia often. So I describe there's voices in your head. So this is the first half a page. And then we cut to the same place, the same time, but this is the third person view. In other words, the customers are there, they're frightened, they're looking at him because Mary is having a complete mental breakdown in the store. She is saying, she's ranting these crazy things, and her description is she's sweating, her hair is tangled, her voice is hoarse, her eyes are bright and speeding. The police come for her and they arrest her, and she's just ranting. Then we cut to an emergency room, psychiatric emergency room. Thomas is saying, yes, second person, which is like you. In other words, what we got here, you are, the opening paragraphs, I say second person, I say you are. In other words, I was trying to put someone into the point of view of the character, which would, in camera point of view, be literally their view. And yes, it is unusual. Although I will give myself credit, Christopher Nolan did it in Oppenheimer. But anyway, the point is, the reason I did that was to get right up in the face of the reader and say, this is not what you're expecting. And what's more, I am insisting that you get inside the head of this mentally ill character. So that's why the very first sentence is, you are in a department store. That is like That is like a fire alarm in somebody's face in Hollywood. You don't write in the second person. Anyway, so the next scene from we are in her point of view. Then we cut out. We watch her get arrested in she's having a fit in a department store, a fancy department store. Then we see her in the psychiatric emergency room, and it's very, very clinical. Because one of the things I did was, in order to research this, my father was a psychiatrist who worked in a city mental hospital, and I spent a day there. I spent a day on the wards, and I spent a day watching how things were working, taking notes, and I tried to learn what the intake would be like. And so there's very, very simple questions. Do you know what day it is? Mary's answers are insane. And by the way, very specific schizophrenic symptoms, in that she can't understand the allegorical nature of a sentence. That's a test that they give. But then she says, I used to know a lot of these things. They took the thoughts away. Who took them? The devils. And then she just begs. She says, please take them out of me. You can cut off my head. You can do whatever you have to do. Just get them out of me, please. And that's the end of the opening sequence. And then we go to a title card, and 10 months later, and we're at a memorial, a psychiatric wing of a psychiatric hospital. Just a little in-joke for myself. Franklin, the name of the memorial hospital, the psychiatric hospital, was the name of my old high school. Anyway, so now what we do is we meet and there's detailed description, a lot of what it's like to be inside, or what it was like to be inside a city mental hospital at the time. And we meet a character named Christy. And what I'm trying to do here is a bunch of fake outs. First of all, we have a story, we meet a mentally ill woman, then we cut 10 months later in a mental hospital, a psych wing, and we're going to assume that we're going to meet Mary again. We're going to see Mary in the hospital. But no, having described the hospital, I then meet this guy named Christy, and he is muttering to himself. And now and then he stares and stops and stares, and then he takes up muttering again. And then a nurse comes by because he's waiting in line for a payphone, because this is before cell phones, just in case you're wondering. And phones play an important part of the story. The nurse says, you got to stop talking to yourself. You seem like a crazy person. And he holds up a play and he says, I'm memorizing my lines. He is an actor. So fake out. You expected this. We're going to play with this. I was playing with the reader. I was saying, don't assume you understand who people are. It's just fun. It's just playful. Anyway, then we spend a while. Christy is in this hospital online with a bunch of the patients, and he is remarkably kind and sensitive. Oscar, another orderly, is incredibly insensitive. Christy is trying to schedule an audition and to get his headshots, so we explain what that title means. Anyway, the point is now, if you look at this is a big sequence of Christy, right? So how long does this go? Look at that. This is amazing. And this is a great scene. However, it goes to page 11. From page, what is it? 3, 4? Yeah. 6. Okay. So we have a 6-page scene introducing this character, Christy. Okay. That's a long time in a movie. In a movie, 6-page scene is a big scene. 3 or 4 is tops. And frankly, nothing's happening here except we're meeting this character and seeing what his life is like. And then, having done that, we cut to a street, and there's Mary walking down the street carrying a bag of groceries. And she goes to a grocery store. She's fine. She's better. It's 10 months later. She's been on medication. She is living in a very poor and rough neighborhood in Manhattan. Used to be called Hell's Kitchen. And we see that she is doing okay. And then we follow her to her apartment. She comes home, and it's a sad little single room apartment. It's a poor neighborhood. Her world is hard, dingy stairway, badly lit hall, noise of cooking and voices, evening news. Um, it's a very small apartment, and she's got very little going on there, but there is a sanctuary sense of quiet. Um, so she comes in, she's bought some flowers, and we start to hear um, through the wall of the apartment to the apartment next door, a woman and a man are having a violent argument. And Mary is trying to be calm. She's trying to be happy and relaxed and safe in her space. And as she's doing, like we see her like wincing at the noise coming through the window. If any of you have ever lived in an apartment, you know that very often through the walls and the ceiling, you will hear the people in the other apartments. And that can be really bad if they are screaming and fighting. And especially if you are trying to maintain some mental health. She has some bunny slippers, like little slippers that look like bunny rabbits. So we're getting the sense of a sweet Mary and a violent world around her. And she's trying to tune it out, and she's got notes on her mirror, take your pills. So we understand she is trying to live with mental illness. And she's getting annoyed at the screaming, and this man and woman are fighting. The woman is saying, "I'll tell your wife." And Mary, there's fighting, there's yelling, there's glass breaking next door. And she says, "This has to stop." And she goes to bang on the wall. She raises her hand to bang on the wall, and there's a gunshot, which she hears through the wall. And then we cut to the other side of the wall, and we see what's happening. And there's a young woman named Carrie who has just been shot in the head. She's been shot under the chin. Bullet came out of her head. She is bleeding to death. She is in the arms of this guy named Frank, who is partly under. He's in a t-shirt. He's partly undressed, and all he says, frankly, is F word, F word, F word. It's like, oh, F word, F word, F word. And he starts to deal with the crime scene. In other words, he has shot her in the head. It turns out, by the way, later that she took his gun. He's a police officer. She grabbed his gun. He was fighting with her over the gun, and it went off. And so he did not actually intend to shoot her. But now we intercut. We go back and forth between Frank and Mary as she's dealing with the fact that she just heard a gunshot. But she is a person who has auditory hallucinations. She's not sure what to do. Meanwhile, he is trying to clean the crime scene. He is a police officer, and he knows, we see when he's done cleaning, that he puts on his uniform, and that he is in fact a cop, and he is trying to clean up the fact that he just had a woman shot in the head with his gun that he was fighting with. Mary is trying to figure out, what do I do? There was a gunshot. There was a fight next door, and now there's a gunshot. He moves a piece of furniture to get the bullet out of the ceiling. When she hears that, she just panics, and she runs out and runs out of the house, goes out to the street. So she goes out to the street. He is cleaning up the crime scene. He's collecting all his personal items. He's wiping down fingerprints. And then he is setting the gas stove on with no fire so that it will fill the place with gas, so that he can blow up the crime scene, destroy the evidence. As he does this, Mary is out on the street. She has left the building. She has gone out to the sidewalk. She's kind of dealing with panic, and she stops and she realizes she's wearing those bunny slippers. She's like, oh crap, I'm out on the street in bunny slippers. I shouldn't be. So she decides to go back. But we know that Frank has just set a bomb. He has set a candle burning and a gas stove running, and he is leaving the apartment. And as he leaves, she is coming down the hall to go back and get her shoes. So they see each other. So he sees that she saw him coming out of what we all know is the crime scene. So now she is a witness. He and she just stare at each other for a second. And then she goes He walks away. She has gone down the hall pretending she doesn't live next door. She doesn't want him to know where she lives. So she is around the corner of the hallway when the apartment explodes. Okay, so this is the first 20 pages, which is honestly a long time. It's an amazing sequence, but really it should have been, and in the later draft, it's the first 10 pages because I cut things down and moved things. So having seen all this, we then go back to Christy, because Christy and Mary are the two heroes of this love story. And then we spend another 10 pages on Christy and his life. He is getting evicted. He is having emotional problems. There's this amazing long sequence with him and this actress named Maggie, in which he is basically trying to hold it together. And you can see now, this is a extremely long dialogue scene. Christy and Maggie are talking. He is under a lot of stress and trying to deal with the fact that he's got this very cute actress woman that he can't break down in front of, but he wants to break down. So there's this long sequence. At the same time, we cut back to Mary, who is outside the burning building, the blown up building, the blown up apartment, and Frank threatens her. Frank finds her on the street. He takes her into an alley and he threatens her. He takes her driver's license. He finds out that she has pills, so he realizes she's got some reason that she's taking the pills. Frank is very, very menacing. The whole point of this story for me was menace, was how scary someone can be by simply abusing their authority. So now we're intercutting that with Christy and Maggie, and Christy is telling a lot about his life because she's trying to relax him and ask him questions. Christy makes a long speech about what it's like working with the mentally ill. Take a look at the speech. This is, take a look at how long it is, okay? This is a huge speech for a movie in which he's talking about what it's like to take care of mentally ill people and to understand them. And then we go back to Mary, who is mentally ill, but on medication and actually doing okay, except that she is under pressure. So here's the point. We are now 30 pages. Maggie and Christy are still going. Now, it's really important to understand Maggie is not going to show up in the rest of the story, except for one scene later on. There's going to be a cool moment when she comes back for a little tiny bit. But we are spending an enormous amount of time with Christy and Maggie. For me, this was interesting because we were learning about Christy and we were seeing how a relationship fails with Christy because of his emotional problems, which are going to be unlocked in his relationship with Mary in the third act. But right now, I just want to point out, we are still essentially in the first act, and Mary has finally reached out to Christy 33 pages in. Okay, so for me, first act ran 33 pages. But in fact, it's even longer because Christy resists Mary's help. And once again, look at the length of this scene. We have a scene where Mary comes to Christy's apartment, page 34. Look at this dialogue. I'm not saying read it. I'm saying just look at how much there is, okay? There is an enormous amount of talk. This is a 5-page scene. Wait, no, longer. Yeah. And it's a great scene. This is a powerful, fabulous scene, but it's a long scene. This is not movie writing in the classical sense. So basically, that's to give you a sense of that's what Headshots is like. It moves very, very small moves of emotional power games. The entire script is people menacing each other, threatening each other, trying to convince each other, it's all about the relationships, which is, to me, a source of pride. However, it means that unless you have an incredible director and incredible actors and the support of a company that says, we are going to sell a detailed character-based thriller based on this big concept hook, instead of doing the big concept hook, instead of doing Eyes of Laura Mars or Blink, we're going to do this other thing, this My Dinner with Andre version. It was a terrible idea. It was hubris on my part. But weirdly, at the moment, there was this leftover independent film world in the 1990s that was still strong because of Sundance, because of Miramax, because of the power of indie film for a while in the 1990s. It seemed like a reasonable thing to do. Okay, so that is Headshots. If you read it, God bless you. It is both in really intense writing and really, really frustrating if you are following the rules of screenwriting, which would be that 5-page scene should have been a 2-page scene. Everything is just big scenes. Okay. Let me get to some questions. Okay. In Witness, would you believe a little boy identifying a well-decorated police officer? Yes, exactly. Witness is another example of this same type of story in which you are trying to give a sense of a certain community or type of person, in that case, the Amish, and you overlay it with a thriller in order to give insight into a subculture or an experience which is otherwise inaccessible to most popular culture. That was the point of Witness, as far as I'm concerned. It was very much on my mind when I wrote this. Anyway, so the answer is yes. Would you believe the little boy? It's more a case of, with evidence like this, if the little boy is saying things which relates to other evidence or other facts, you wouldn't only rely on the little boy's evidence, but you wouldn't only rely on the schizophrenic woman's evidence. But if it ties into other evidence that you have, it becomes a part of a bigger picture. Withholding information again. Yes, indeed. Thank you. Okay. Yes, indeed. Wait until dark. And yes, what the mentally ill see in real life, the hardships that the mentally ill face which is so ridiculously unfair considering we now, like even more than 30 years ago, how much we know about how to help. Okay. Steed says, I have a problem with long scenes or dialogue. How do you approach cutting into better proportions? I will tell you, these two scripts do not solve that. I was at this time in the 1990s determined to write long dialogue scenes. That was my thing. That was what I wanted to do. And therefore, you will not see that solved here. What you should do if you want to see how to do it is to compare the Burning Angels to the script Fail, or even more so, Jane. I wrote a script called Jane, which I did an earlier behind the script. The script is available through a link on that one. That's a case where I was trying to strip down the dialogue to very short scenes. And even when they're longer page-wise, the actual back and forth dialogue is very fast, short sentences. These scenes are long, complex conversations with big speeches, because I love speeches. So here's what happened. Meg Stewart, Jodie Foster's company, they loved the script, but they could not there's no way to make it. They were like, this is not a movie script that we can support, but it's got the heart of a great story. And they were very, very supportive of like, how can you make this work? And the thing that I realized was the main problem, aside from everything else, was this. The structure was about two people, Mary and Frank, who were attacking each other, were confronting each other through or intermediated by two other characters. So there's this sort of Venn diagram of Mary and Christy and Doyle and Frank, and each one of them has their own story, but then those stories overlap in another point, that's where the conflict comes in. It's very complex. And as a story, especially as a story in which Jodie Foster is going to play one of these four people, a Jodie Foster movie, a Hollywood star movie, does not make them 1/4 of the story. Not to say that that can't be good, but Hollywood, especially in the 1990s, was very star-oriented. The way you sold a movie was you had a star doing a thing that the audience liked them doing. So, at a certain point, I realized the problem with the story was the structure. The very concept of the story was this. And I said, it's got to turn into this, which is instead of Frank, the cop who had the accidental crime, being an evil monster, I made him a guy who had made a horrible mistake, a guy who wasn't that bright, but did have a good heart. And he was involved. He was having an affair. He's a married guy with a child, but he was having an affair with a woman he met on his beat because he was a cop who walked the streets of a poor neighborhood. He met a drug addict and he started an affair with her. And he was having very, very deep conflicted feelings about this affair. She had her own problems and she threatened him. She threatened to tell his wife about the affair. They argue about it. And during that argument, she pulled his gun out of the holster and threatened him with it. He grabbed the gun. In the fight over the gun, it went off. It was in her hand, actually, and it shot her. So he has committed a crime, but the main crime he has committed in this version of the story is the cover-up. In other words, having an affair, not a crime. When the gun went off and he covered up the crime, that's his crime. So what happens is, in the new version, the Burning Angels version, the character of Doyle has become a corrupt cop whose goal it is in the story is to protect this dumb young cop, because cops stick together, the blue line. And that was his motive. And so Doyle becomes the pressure coming against Mary, trying to get her to stop reporting the crime, because she is, as her heroic act is saying, I witnessed something and I want to report it. And when they start to pressure her, she starts to push back. It's really heroic, but within the reality of mental illness. She does not become a crime fighter. She does not become an action hero. She becomes a person who is trying to stand up to a corrupt and frightening authority, which has guns. That was the new concept of the script. It's much stronger. I mean, the other one was a really cool art film, and I stand by a lot of it, but the Burning Angels version is much better. And one of the other things I did was, I added a violent sequence in which Doyle, the cop, breaks into Mary's house. She interrupts him, and he therefore attacks her, and she fights him back. It's a great sequence. And one of the things about it is, I came up with something that I thought was really important in between the two scripts, is that in order to show more about who Mary was, I created what I will call a physicalization, or I don't know, objective correlative in the poetry version. Okay, so this is the Burning Angels version. This was a couple years later. Exact same first sequence, first scene. This description, very slightly different, and the dialogue is slightly condensed. Also, it's a minor point, but a real one. The first draft you'll see was written in word processing software. It was on Apple Word, I believe it was at the time, maybe Pages. But the point is, it was not screenwriting software. As a result, let's see if I can show you this. So the type spacing, the formatting is slightly different. which means here. Okay, so this is final draft. As having sold scripts, I finally was required to learn final draft. So this is the final draft version. And this is the word processing version. And if you'll see, the space between the lines in this is tighter. Okay, there's less room between the lines, which means that you get more on a page. So my goal here was in this first page to get her character, to get the clothes are mismatched and a simplified version of her her hallucinations. In other words, the original version was loose and all over the place. What I tried to get this down in the new version was a very specific symbolic concept, which is everyone starts out as angels, but the angels, when they're coming down to earth, they catch on fire and they become devils and they attack you. And that is Mary's hallucination. That is her philosophy, is that we are all angels, but because of the travails of this world, we become devils. And that is essentially her experience, especially of the people that she meets in this story. So not only is it mental illness, but it is also a poetic vision of the story. So now this burning angels thing, which originally was just a cool idea. It's like, oh, that's a cool picture. An angel burning in a Christmas holiday department store. Whoa. But now I thought, well, why are the angels on fire? What are angels to Mary? And because Mary is essentially a burning angel herself. She is a person who is good, but is tormented by her life on this earth. So the same sequence, but then at the end of it, the 10 months later, we then cut immediately to Mary's apartment. So we see that, and the change is it's almost identical in many ways, except we've also have her entire wall is covered with little drawings that she has done, that Mary is an artist. She was an art teacher in the story. All sorts of different pictures, and they are all angels and demons. They are things she has seen in her life, still lives of her life, self-portraits. In other words, I'm describing her inner portrait of life, but we're seeing it not just through her point of view, but through her artwork. And that is going to come throughout the entire story. We see her. She then later can draw a picture of the person she saw walking out of the crime scene. In other words, there's layers that once I had this concept that Mary did drawings, which both give us an empathy for her because we see how much she loves life, but at the same time, we see how tortured she is. And then there is a small spoiler here, but we're going to show at the very end, Mary has a picture on the wall of Frank, and he has become a burning angel. So, so this symbolic element, has also become a plot element. And that's the kind of thing that happens, is that once you have a thing, once you've got this idea of like, ooh, if she does drawings, wouldn't that be cool? Because just as a visual element, having this sensitive person's feelings shown, that's just cool. And then you start to say, well, how else can I use that? The other way I could use it is on the dresser in her apartment. And there's going to be some spoilers here. I just want to alert you. Sorry, trying to resize my. All right. So let me see if I can go to the beginning. Okay. So here, when we meet Mary in her apartment, we also see. Oh, by the way, the cool little thing I did here is just a fancy little trick. We cut from Mary getting put into the hospital 10 months later. And then we go to her apartment, but she's not in it. It's just a quiet place in which we see her soul. But the apartment in its sadness and shabbiness, but also its artisticness. And then we cut to the street and we see her coming home through this poor neighborhood, and showing that she is much better. And then she comes into the apartment. And we see this, and we also see on the dresser, because now that I had this angels thing and these saints, we have on her dresser, there's a whole collection of little plastic statues of angels, like little, just about that big with wings and stuff, saints, angels. And what's going to happen is, spoiler alert, when she is in her apartment and Doyle, the corrupt cop, has broken in because he's messing with her medication to try and drive her further insane, make her an unreliable witness by tampering with her medication, she comes home unexpectedly. And so he's in the bathroom messing with her medication. She comes home. He comes up behind her and attacks her in order to get out of the place because he can't escape without her seeing. He attacks her. He puts a towel over her head and bangs her into the wall. She's trying to fight him. She doesn't know who it is. She grabs the plastic statue on the dresser and she stabs behind her to get it, the person holding her. So now the angel wings, the little plastic angel wings, become a weapon that put out Doyle's eye, which is very powerful stuff. And for me, it's more powerful because you've brought in an element and then you're reusing it, set up and payoff. The idea that you can say, okay, I want to show Mary's psychology. I want to show Mary's beautiful soul, but also her tortured soul. Oh, here's a physical version of it, drawings. And then you say, oh, well, once she's drawing angels, what else would she be? Well, she's religious. She was raised Catholic. She would have those little statues. Oh, and then later, when I was thinking about the scene where she fights Doyle, I thought, oh, man, the statues, she can use it. So what happens is once you start having things in your story, you look for how they can be used in an unexpected and powerful way. So that is a trick. But also just this script is just better. It's just better. Things move faster. And this is still very much the same scene, same sequence, but the gunshot happens on page 8. Okay, I believe it was, I don't even remember what it was, but it's the same exact scene, but it is now much sooner because we cut Christie out. And that's what I'm trying to tell you the story of, is when I realized, once we had said, like, this is not Glenn Gers's auteur directing movie, this is a Jodie Foster film. Okay, a Jodie Foster film. Jodie wasn't going to direct it, but Jodie was going to be the star. And when you have a star, you don't take their story and split it up among other characters. You say, what is Mary's power? What is Mary's story? What is Mary's pain? And the more I focused on that, the more I realized I had put a lot of that into Christie. And what I did was I took Christie out of the story, and I that gave Mary a lot more vulnerability and also a lot more power, because now Frank is in the position of having endangered Mary, an innocent person. And Frank, while he made bad mistakes, is not bad. Doyle is increasingly violent towards Mary because Mary is not obeying. Mary is not submitting to his, he wants to make the crime go away, and Mary is a witness. Mary, in order to preserve her own dignity, has said, I need to stand up for this poor girl who got shot. And I know who did it. I have to tell. And the more that she stands up, the more that Doyle comes down on her violently to scare her into silence. But because she is so angry at her vulnerability, the more he pressures her, the more she fights back. And that is the rising crisis of the story. It's really cool. It's just much, much better. The other one was a great story for a little indie film, but this is a much more powerful thriller. It's actually more powerful in almost every way. Okay, let's see. Okay. So, let's see what comments are. Okay. Okay. Sorry, I'm going back to do some comments here. Okay, so we started with Steed. How do you approach cutting into better proportions? All right, let's just answer that question. Let's talk about that. The first answer is break it down to what is happening, not what's the action. For instance, the action of the scene with Christy and Maggie that I showed you earlier, where he's coming home to rehearse with this other actress, but he's sort of having a nervous breakdown at the time and trying to conceal it. And Christy has a lot of problems with intimacy. So the point of the scene originally for me in my mind was, how do we reveal Christy? But that's not a dramatic action. That's my goal as a screenwriter. But Christy's action was to push Maggie away. In other words, when it really comes down to it, the point of this story is Maggie was trying to get him to open up. Maggie was trying to help him and connect with him. And Christy has grown up defending against his feelings. And so when someone tries to help him, he pushes them away. And so that's the action of the story. Once you have the action of the scene is Maggie is trying to get Christy to open up because she can sense he is suffering, and he is evasive and eventually just says, like, basically back off. And that gets amped up when Mary shows up and says, I need your help. And he just flips out on her. He's like, I don't care. I don't want to help you. And he is releasing his need to push away his feelings. Well, you can do pushing away their feelings in 2 pages. I did it in 10. So the answer is, the first way you approach is to figure out the action and then decide, how much do I want to build up to that action? How many twists and turns? How many steps am I going to take? Because usually you can do it in 3 or 4. You don't need to build 10 steps to get to that blow up. And the blow up doesn't have to be that big. I made it very big. So the answer is, the main way that you approach long scenes is figure out, like, if you have multiple actions, see if you can break it up. But if you're, in my case, there's one action. And so the answer is, how do you get that action into fewer steps, fewer back and forth adjustments between the characters? Okay, let me just make sure I keep that question. Okay. Thank you, Nishaj. That's very kind. He's saying he loves the live streams. I really appreciate that. Pennywise says, Screenwriting Magazine, I think that's what it was called, had a section at the back of story concepts, not scripts, and how much they sold for. I can see a story get optioned for the idea alone. Yes, there are many people in Hollywood particularly who believe that essentially an idea for a script is the property, is the valuable property. That frankly, writers and writing come and go. You can put 30 of them on an idea. I think that's not entirely true. I believe we have found over in the decades since this idea, what was originally called in the 1980s, high concept, it's the title of a book about Jerry Simpson, of Simpson and Bruckheimer. But anyway, high concept meant an idea that you can convey in 2 or 3 sentences. And frankly, it doesn't matter how it's done. The idea is what sells. That has created some truly crappy movies, which is too bad because often the idea is good, but they've disregarded the importance of the other elements of filmmaking. Anyway, yes. Okay. Thomas says, it seems like it would work well as a novel. Yes, this is the thing. The Headshots version is me being me. When I wanted to write novels and do plays and do indie films. And as far as I was concerned, that was all one thing. It was all just my expression. And I wanted to take elements of one or the other and overlap them. That's my talent. It's also my downfall as a productive screenwriter because Hollywood needs what Hollywood needs. And so, yes, it would be a good novel, but I wasn't writing a novel. Okay. Pennywise's rule of thumb: when in doubt, cut it out. Something inside will tell you when it's not quite right. I wish that were true, Pennywise, but I got to tell you, when I wrote this, it did not seem like a single word could be cut because I believed that you didn't understand the emotion if you didn't really build it slowly. Michael says, would you do a rewrite of this script? Okay, well, first of all, I did. That's why I'm showing you the two rewrites. But would I do a rewrite of the later version, the great version? The answer is if somebody wanted it, but here's the rest of the story. I didn't tell you this part. What happened was, when I finished the Burning Angels version, the script was finally at a point where the company said, there are things that still need to be decided and changed about this script, but it is now in a good place. What we need is a director. We need a director to come in and say, this is what I want to emphasize. This is how I want to do it stylistically. In other words, the director was the next voice making decisions. I had taken it to where I thought Burning Angels was shootable, great script. And they said, and they were right, first of all, it doesn't matter if it's a perfect script. A director is going to want to make it their version. And the other thing is, Jodie would only work with a handful of directors. She had experienced bad directors and would never work with them again. So therefore, she was like, there's a relatively limited list of great directors that I will work with. We need to get this script to them and see what they will do with it. So I was like, good, I got this script into a place where I could, where I had made it as good as I could get it because I saw it as great. Now we needed somebody to come in and say, look, as a filmmaker, I don't want to do an 8-page scene or a 4-page speech or whatever else I had written because I did want to do that. So let's talk about how to make that a page. The other element that happened in this draft was, in order to get a budget, in order to get a studio behind a movie, you needed Jodie, you needed a great director, and you needed a big other star. The villain especially had to be a big star. I had in my mind Pacino. I wanted Pacino, and I tried to write the scenes. Doyle's scenes became very ornate. Really, there's a speech in The Burning Angels. Let me see if I can find it. Where Doyle is trying to make a point to Frank, the squeamish, weak young cop. And Doyle is the tough street cop who's been around and understands that, oh, well, you can't always protect people kind of thing. Let me see. I'm just trying to find this incredible scene. Okay. Sorry, just scroll in here, trying to find this scene to give you an example of how crazy I was. Mary and Doyle have some amazing scenes in The Burning Angels because Doyle became a juicy part. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to show you this. This is page 41 of Burning Angels. Frank and Doyle are now parked outside of Mary's apartment building because Doyle is intending to scare Mary into shutting up. So Doyle is sitting there with Frank. They don't know each other very well. And Frank decides to tell Doyle decides to tell Frank a story in order to make a point. This story starts here, okay? This guy named McGuire. Okay, now there's this speech. Okay, this is a speech. This is a speech. Look at this speech. Okay, it goes on and on. It is, okay. All right, we're talking 2 solid pages. Even Aaron Sorkin would not write a 2-page speech. The point of the speech is, frankly, this speech is about this cop who does a horrible thing. And he says, kid, I would kill myself, except I honestly would, except I don't see what good it would do anyone. In other words, what he's saying is either you're going to scare the shit out of this woman and be a bad person, or you're going to have to take the guilt on yourself. You're going to have to take the fall yourself. And that's not going to help anybody. And I'm not going to support you doing that. The point is, I was trying to lure a star, but at the same time, I thought what would lure a star, especially Pacino, very theater-oriented, was a 2-page speech. I guarantee you, there is no one in Hollywood who would look at a 2-page speech and not say, we got to cut that. Anyway, okay. But the point was, we wrote this, I got the script to where the company liked it. It took about 2 years of rewrites. I did 4 drafts. And I'm really proud. The last draft I actually did for free. Because usually you get paid when you rewrite a script. I felt like I had gotten an idea and I couldn't quite describe it well. And I had used up my draft. So I said, I'm going to do another draft just so that the script is where it should be, which I did. Which you should not do, but I did. Anyway, what happened was they then took the script to a handful, it was probably a dozen famous directors in the 1990s. And none of them wanted to do it for various reasons. I didn't hear about most of them. A lot of them had other projects. A lot of them were just, the script was not easy. The script was going to take work. So I know Sidney Lumet turned it down. I know that Jonathan Demme, who had done Silence of the Lambs with Jodie, he hated it. He was actually offended by it. He said, if you are going to do, if you want to do a script about mental illness, why are you making it into a thriller? This bothered him. I'm not I thought it was a good idea. One of the things that is preserved in both versions there are large speeches in which someone explains key points about mental illness. There's one, different people take this speech idea in the 2 different scripts, but you could tell that it was important to me. I said, among the things this script must retain are these information packets for the audience about mental illness. I think I did a much better job of putting them into the second script, but they're still there and they are still information packets. Anyway, what happened was when all of the directors turned it down, there was one other director, another part of how much I did not understand my role in Hollywood. They said, we're going to show it to Brian De Palma. And I said, absolutely not. I think Brian De Palma, while a master stylist, is an extremely poor director and writer of scripts and characters. I think he's shallow and while he can do well when he's got somebody else's script going, but even then, I think Brian De Palma is somebody you study for his filmmaking craft, but he's just a terrible person as far as conveying characters. And I just said no. And I remember them looking at me in this meeting like, do you know who you are? You're the writer. You don't have any say in anything. And they were literally startled by my vehemence, but I felt very vehemently. And I believe they didn't show it to him because just how incredibly respectful Meg and the company were. I never actually talked to Jodie. I mean, she would read drafts and pass messages on through Meg, but I talked to her once. She was extremely nice to me. And the other thing that happened was, having gotten to all these directors, the company that was paying for Jodie Foster's company within it. In other words, there was a company, it was called Polygram Pictures. It was a movie financing company, and they'd given Jodie Foster money to run a company so that she could develop projects that she would then make with them. That's what a deal is. A production deal is that a director, a star, gets some big entity to finance the office, the employees, and the money paid to the creative people like the writers in order to develop projects, to get them ready to shoot. And then, so it's like a development. But the problem was that Polygram got bought by another company. I believe it was USA. Anyway, so now Jodie's company was owned by a different financial entity than the one that had set up her company. Polygram was a very artsy releasing company, and they supported Jodie. She was like, I'm going to do this weird, I'm going to produce a weird French film. I'm going to put my name on it so that it can get released here in America, called La Haine. She's doing a lot of really cool stuff, but very artsy indie. Polygram was okay with that. USA was not. They were like, this is not good. And eventually they wanted to get rid of Jodie's company. So then Jodie's company had to find a new financing entity. Well, this took years. This took about 2 or 3 years. And during that time, the option on my script kept running out. In other words, they had given me a certain amount of money and said, we want to keep this script. We'll pay you to hold it. And every time that came up for renewal, they said, we're sorry, we're trying to find a new financing company. Can you let us renew the option? So I did. I did it 2 or 3 times over the course of 4 or 5 years. Unfortunately, at the end of that process, Jodie's company was folded into Paramount Pictures. Paramount is a big studio. They are not an artsy indie little place. And Paramount said, if we take on your company in order to be in the Jodie Foster business, you got to drop some of these artsy indie things. And so she had to drop a bunch of her projects, but she did fight for some. She was like, I respect that I can't do everything that I was planning to do before. This is bigger star kind of material for Paramount, but she held on to some. She said, I want to hold on to a couple of my projects in this new deal. And Paramount said, okay. She made sure that mine was one of them. However, the minute that Paramount owned the company and owned the project, they looked at it and they said, yeah, cool concept. Who is this guy writing these speeches and these long dialogue scenes and these characters? He doesn't understand what a Paramount movie is, what a movie is. So they had one meeting with me. They called me and said, what would you do to rewrite the script for us? And I told them my ideas about developing the characters further, and they fired me immediately. And they said, we're going to get more Hollywood screenwriters to work on this. There was nothing that could be done about that. However, when the option came up for renewal again, Jodie Foster's company said, hey, we need to renew the option again so that Jodie can still try and get this made. And I wrote her a letter and I said, I'm really sorry, but the whole point of this movie was for me to make it this way. And now they've fired me. So as much as I love that you want to do this, this that you're going to do by the time Paramount gets done with it is not going to be something that I'm going to have intended. Now, once again, I am not understanding the role of a screenwriter. Screenwriters do not have the authorial power over scripts. Directors do. Sometimes producers, sometimes stars, but mainly not screenwriters. The screenwriter's vision, as much as everyone talks about it, is not important. So therefore, I said, I'm not going to renew the option. I want it back. I want the script back. I want to make it my own way. I'll make my own version like I was going to do originally. Unfortunately, Paramount then said, it's not that much money. An option means they give you, like they say, we will buy it for $500,000. We're going to give you $20,000 to hold it for 2 years while we decide if we really want to buy it. And then every year after that, when they renew it, it's another $25,000. So that's like they're sort of taking a rental fee before they decide if they will buy it. They don't buy it until they think they're going to make it. Because why would you spend $500,000 on a script that you're not going to make? That's what the option is. So I had optioned the script to Jodie's company and renewed it 3 or 4 times. So I had used up a good, close to half of the purchase price. And so Paramount said, the purchase price wasn't that much money for them. For me, it was a lot, but so they just bought it. They just said, okay, we're just going to exercise the option. The option allows them to buy it at any time. So they bought it. And when they bought it, they just kept it. They never got it to where they wanted to make it. So I don't even know who did rewrites after, but whatever happened to it, it's now sitting on a shelf at Paramount Pictures. Legally speaking, I don't even have the right to show you guys the script, but I'm going to figure nobody cares. So that's what happened. The script was bought by Paramount in the hopes that they could make a Jodie Foster big movie out of it. It didn't work out. They own it. There's nothing I can do about it. Which, honestly, they gave me a lot of money. I had an incredible experience writing it. I learned so much. The script I wrote was really good and it got shown around. That's what happened. So the answer is, would I rewrite this? No, I can't. It is no longer my property. Okay. Steed says, that is a more engaging formula. The original would be a good novel, but Burning Angels does seem to work better structure-wise. Yes, I agree. Nishad says, I struggle with dialogue because you are leaving clues for your audience. Everything has to be about the theme or the goal of your script, correct? So to me, it's like a puzzle of clues for the audience. It is partly, but remember, it's not everything has to be a clue. The clues are buried inside the action between the people. The main thing that dialogue is people relating to each other in a moment. In other words, something is happening. And the way that you get dialogue to work is to focus on what's happening for those characters in that moment. There's among the important things I have written about this, there is let me see if I can find it. There is a video called Dramatic Action and one called Dialogue. And I urge you to look at those because those talk about these concepts, which is basically, if you want to drop a clue in, the person in the scene needs to express that clue to someone in the story. They have to have a personal need to speak about that topic. It can't just be because you are dropping a clue to the audience. It has to be because they are trying to make something happen in their reality. That's the key to dialogue. Okay. But it does change the focus. Seems originally it was Mary's world. Burning Angels is the world that does not understand Mary. Not really. It's more that the original story was Mary's and Christie's world. And what I did was I said, Christie's world, while interesting, is a separate story. I like the idea of having different stories happening in the same movie, but really most movies have one story, and the story was Mary's story. So what I did was I got rid of the second story of Christie, which I thought was interesting, but it is an unconventional structure. I thought the original script had different spacing. Yes. Yes. Okay. Thank you, A-Link. I could see how a strongly conceived character like Mary would appeal to a great actor like Jodie Foster. Me too. Jodie was wonderful. Her company was amazing. Okay. I think the art improves things. Yes. Mary's artwork. Yes. It's a good way to show more about her world without more dialogue. Exactly. Nishaj, I joined late. Is this a script that was made? No, this is a script that was not made. This is 2 drafts of a script that was never made, and the story of why each one was written and why they are so different, because they are drastically different. But, and once again, I urge you to, if you can compare the two, what's fascinating to me at least, is how I could take certain things that were good in the original, especially the ending. The way the story resolves, to me, is immensely powerful. I'm very, very proud of how the story resolves, because the thing about most thrillers is they resolve in essentially a Western showdown in which the good guy kills the bad guy. And for me, the problem is that doesn't feel like the honest resolution of life's problems. So therefore, what I wanted to do was honor the thriller, honor the need for a violent confrontation, but at the same time, make it one that expressed the characters and the need to not just kill bad guys by like a sheriff killing the bad guy. So what's interesting to me is how I found that in the first version and found an even better version in the second, but it is essentially the same scene, but very differently done. Okay. Thank you. Christie would be a great character, but it sounds like he needs a different film. That's exactly what I decided. Okay. It sounds like there are two dramatic arcs, Mary's and Frank's. Yes, in other words, I reduced it from 4 to 2. Doyle is a villain. He does have an arc. He gets increasingly violent out of frustration with the other two characters. Okay, yes. Yeah. It was the right choice to kind of, thank you, yes. But what's amazing to me is you have to remember, I had never done a rewrite. I had been writing scripts for 20 years at this point. I had been writing screenplays for 10 years. And I still did not understand the basic concept of focusing a structure on the single character if you are writing for Hollywood. Okay. Damn you all. Listening to learn how to explain a plot without rambling. Yes, thank you, damn you all. That is actually this, and this took me decades. It took me decades, and I do believe that the things I am teaching in my videos are once again focused on who is it about? What are they trying to do? In other words, the center of the story. If you can learn to communicate that, to tell a story, it really helps, because it also helps because that way you're telling yourself the story. You're saying, I see what the story is. As much as I see a lot going on, the story is that Mary is trying to stand up for herself in the face of this unfair pressure. And when you can get it down to that one central action for each character, it really, really helps with not rambling. Steed says, I am very good at cutting other people's stuff to bits, but my stuff, no. Okay, I apologize, but we're going to have to stop the comments. This is great. So Jodie had to get interested, and then in turn, an acceptable director had to be sold, and a mailing. That's a lot of people to buy in. Not only, it's a wonder anything ever gets made. This is the truth. Pennywise is telling the truth. Yes, the amount of people, because not just you have to get the talent, the stars and the writer and the director all together on one page. They all have to agree, and it has to be in their interest, in their career. Like it could be something that they say, this is amazing, but it's just not a good time for me. That happens a lot. So then you have to get all those people, and then you have to get all these layers of people in the finance and distribution end, the producers, the executives, the many, many layers of them. It's like 20 or so people that you need to get to love a script, to commit to $20, $30 million in those days. Now $60 or $70 million to make a thriller movie. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. It is unimaginably hard to get the momentum to make something in the business. And partly it's because the stakes are so freaking high. When you have to, if you make a $60 million movie, in order to make that back with all the various people who are taking cuts and all the various expenditures for advertising, you need to make $120 million. The tricky thing is, if you can make a movie for 10 million, in theory, you only need to make 20 million. That seems doable, but in fact, it's harder to sell a $20 million film. It's harder to get people to go for low budget in the audience. So very, very complicated. Cassandra syndrome. Yes. In other words, yes, Mary. Mary is she has the vision, but nobody believes her, to their destruction. Hey, Alan M., nice to see you. Thank you for being here. Steed says, I've met enough cops that I think many of them would go in for a penny, in for a pound. We're looking at 15 years in prison. Who cares about some schizophrenic woman who can destroy us? Yes, that was actually a major point in the original discussions in the early 1990s. Why would the cops be so criminal in this case? And I think now the violence and corruption of many police officers, not all. I do not believe all cops are like this. But the point is, you can understand when they are protecting their own beliefs and fiefdom, they can begin to dehumanize, especially a mentally ill woman. Okay. They must have had a lot of faith in the story to keep renewing the hold on it. Yes, it is sad that it didn't work out, but no, there are no villains here. Well, there may be some villains at Paramount, and I will not name names. But then they're all gone from there anyway. But no, Meg, Stuart Kleinman, who has passed away, Jodie Foster, these people truly, they fought for this project. They protected me like unbelievably. It's really, really cool. Skepular, I am not going to answer the question. I will answer that next week or soon, because today we're just talking about this one script. Okay. Well, two drafts of the script. But next week, Skepular. Years ago, I asked a playwright I interviewed, what advice do you have for beginning playwrights? Best advice I ever got. After you write your first play, put it in a drawer and write another. You could have carried on with new ideas and new scripts while cashing in on options to this day. Essentially, I did. And in fact, I took the money from this sale. In other words, when I lost this script, I used that money partly to pay to make an independent film for myself. So, that's cool. Okay. Steed says, I wrote a 12-episode series beginning and end, sent it to old colleagues who worked in Hollywood. They said I had the wrong protagonist. They were correct. Rewriting the entire thing again. My question here is, I have so many versions of this story in my head, it is actually just living in my brain and making me slightly mad. How do you reset your brain to allow the new vision? That's a great question. I believe that Pennywise's answer is the only one I know, which is you need to get time away from it. You need to write something entirely different and then come back to it. I have never been able to wash my brain of a vision without doing something else, something different, and then going back to it. The other thing is the more that you can define the difference, like in this case, understanding that there was no Christie and that therefore Frank was this ambivalent person and it was a conflict between Mary and Doyle, understanding that picture of the story allowed me to refocus on is this scene telling that story? You are welcome, Nishaj. Absolutely. Thank you. My comment was not saying why the cops were so criminal. My comment was, why didn't they just kill Mary? And the answer is, I agree. My feeling was they didn't think they had to kill her. They thought they could scare her. When they didn't work to scare her, they tried to escalate to discrediting her. In other words, I don't believe that people move right to killing. They do in movies, especially professional killers, but these cops are not professional killers. They're people who are threatened. And as people who are threatened, they said, what can we do to stop this threat? The first thing they do is just scare her. When she doesn't respond to the fear, when she fights back, they say, let's discredit her, which they do by trying to change her medication to trigger a mental breakdown. If that had worked, they would have not had to kill her. Only when that doesn't work, when she fought back, does it become a matter of killing. So for me, it's a very important build. Because a lot of people are, why don't they just kill him? Most people don't just kill, hopefully. You are very, very welcome, Skepular. Absolutely thrilled by your question. I will answer it next time. But right now, I need to go. This has been fabulous. I hope that you read these scripts. The scripts are available in PDF form. In the description, there is a link. It goes to my website where there is a page where you can download the PDFs of these two scripts. If you can only read one, I suggest you read The Burning Angels. That's the good one. If you're interested in how it came to be and you want to read the other one, it's a cool comparison to make you think in terms of what are the differences and what are the things that are the same, because there's very often bits of dialogue which I actually took from one character and gave to another in the different versions. Anyway, Pennywise says, I'm glad I'm home at this time. It's a real pleasure too. We're going to keep up this community. Thank you so much, all of you. It is delightful. This was fun. And I thank you for being here, and I will see you next week. Until then, go write something.